have the $2.5 trillion plan and cutbacks offered by Congressman Jim Jordan, who is chairman of the Republican Study Committee, issued his massive budget-cutting plan last Thursday. And Congressman Jordan joins us now. Good to see you, Congressman. Thanks for coming in.
Good to be with you, David.
Appreciate it. All right, so first of all, on the president, do you think he has changed? Has he had this conversion that the media is talking about?
You know, I mean, we'll see. We'll see what he says. But, I mean, you read the stuff that's in the press today, and he's talking about some things are off limits. Look, David, you know this. The situation is so bad. Our debt to GDP numbers, our deficit to GDP numbers, it's $14 trillion in debt. It's so bad, everything has to be on the table. We've got to make major cuts if we want to put this country on the right path. Now, the one encouraging thing is, some reports are saying the president is at least talking about reducing the corporate tax. Because one of the things we need, if we're going to ultimately deal with the situation, is we need economic growth. And the fact that he's at least willing to think about that, that's at least one positive. But I'll wait and see where he is on the spending. What I do know is we've got to get on a path that gets us to balance because the future of the country is at stake.
Well, we had Austin Goolsbee here, one of the president's top economic advisors, saying, in fact, that he was in favor of at least looking at the idea of lowering the corporate tax rate, eliminating some of the corporate deductions and going to a lower rate, which sounds like a pretty good idea to us. But has he seen or commented upon, either Austin Goolsbee or any of the other economic advisors, on your plan to cut $2.5 trillion over 10 years?
Most of what we're hearing from the Democrats, Dave, is that they think, oh, this is drastic. This is not drastic. This is a good first step. This just deals with non-defense discretionary spending, and it goes back to 2006 levels, and we hold that to accrue the $2.5 trillion in savings over the 10-year window. So this is not going to solve the problem, but it's an important and it's a good first step. So the idea that the Democrats are saying, oh, this is drastic, this is terrible, they got to be kidding. What we're doing is, again, just starting the process so we can get the country headed in the right direction and ultimately balance the budget and create the environment where we're going to have job growth and economic growth.
So there have been no Democratic leaders who've said either yay or nay to your plan officially.
No one officially, but some of the comments we've heard from Democrat members is they're against what we're doing. Yeah. Oh, this is drastic. It's just not the case. I mean, think about it. We're having a debate right now in Congress on the continuing resolution whether to cut a full $100 billion in discretionary spending or something less than that. $100 billion, 13 times that is what the deficit is right now. That's only 1/13 of the deficit. And somehow that's dramatic, that's too drastic. You got to be kidding me. The American people get this. It's so common sense. Right now, the political class here in Washington has got to have the courage to step up and say, you know what? We got to put everything on the table. We got to be willing to look at every single program, every single line item, because the situation is so serious. The future of the country is truly at stake, and that's why it's important.
When Paul Ryan, who is the new head of the Budget Committee, the Republican head of the Budget Committee, when he put forth a sort of a budget retrospective. What did he call it? He called it his
roadmap.
Yeah, exactly. His roadmap for America's future. A lot of Republican leaders were reluctant to embrace it because it touched on those third rails of Social Security and Medicare.
David, Paul's plan has got a lot of good items in it, and we should take a look at that, and we should implement a lot of that. And I support what he's trying to do, particularly to save Medicare and to save Social Security. Back to the point I made, even national defense, entitlements, national defense, and discretionary spending, everything has to be considered because it is so serious. And I'm a conservative. We hate to cut national defense. That's where we're supposed to spend taxpayer dollars. But if there are inefficiencies in national defense, we should look at those as well. And we need to make sure our country's secure. We need to make sure our men and women in uniform have what they need to do their job. But everything's got to be on the table because the situation is just that important.
Well, I agree, but what leads me into cynicism is the fact that if even some Republican leaders are not willing to accept a plan, the roadmap that's presented by their new Budget Committee chairman, then how are you going to get any Democrats on your side?
I think a lot more Republicans are going to embrace many of Paul's ideas and the spending cuts that we've outlined. We got a letter that 89 members of the Republican Study Committee have signed saying let's get to a full $100 billion in cuts for the remainder of this fiscal year. This freshman class, I think, gets it. So I'm encouraged by what I see, and we're going to find out over the next several months when we deal with the CR, when we deal with the debt ceiling, when we deal with the budget, and when we deal with the appropriation bills. We're going to find out over the next 6 months if we're for real about this, if we're going to rise up to the standard that the American people have set, or if we're just pretending.
By the way,
we should see members do the right thing.
Paul Ryan's roadmap actually was endorsed by Alice Rivlin, who's a lifelong Democrat. She worked with him on developing a plan for Medicare which would give individual recipients of Medicare much more choice in how they use their money. It would essentially give you a voucher so that you could decide for yourself which insurance program you want, correct?
A means-tested voucher that you could use to purchase insurance in the private sector, put you in control. The whole concept is family and personal empowerment versus a top-down model that bureaucrats here in Washington try to administer. That's why the American people don't like this health care bill. So it's definitely moving in the right direction, and certainly something we should look at as we move through this whole budget process.
All right, Jim Jordan, stay with us if you can. Want to bring in tonight's panel.
Sure.
We have Lindsay Piegza of FTN Financial. Andrea Tanteros is a conservative columnist, and Fox News contributor Dan Gerstein is a Democratic strategist. Well, let me start with you, Andrea, because it is interesting, the reluctance on the part of some of the Republican leaders, like John Boehner and others, to fully endorse Paul Ryan's plan. Why is that?
Yeah, there's a lot of fault lines here. I mean, you have a more conservative wing of the party that just come in, the Tea Party. They come in energetic and they want to make cuts, and they've made these promises and they have to do it. You have then the political leadership that, David, they know when they start introducing cuts, that's going to have political blowback. They're saying who's going to do it first. Democrats, you have Harry Reid this Sunday on the Sunday show saying Social Security's fine, let's not touch it. But you have Obama who wants to spend more. So Obama's got to deal with the Democrats in his own party who want to spend more, and Republicans on the right, some who want to cut a little and some who want to cut a lot.
Paul Ryan has to deal with Republicans who don't have a strong backbone. There's some Republicans that are unwilling to take on the subject of Medicare, for example, after just having criticized President Obama for going after Medicare and Obamacare.
Some Republicans, the entire Republican leadership, they had an opportunity to make a statement in the campaign last year and endorse Paul Ryan's roadmap. They consciously decided not to. The Republican leadership, let's be serious, is not serious about cutting government or reducing the deficit.
Well, come on. I would put an exception with Jim Jordan, who just came out with $2.5 trillion.
But he's not the Republican. But he's not the Republican leadership.
He's part of the Republican.
But he's not calling the
leadership.
shots, and I guarantee you, they will not support his plan.
Let me throw that back to Jim. What do you think about that, Jim? Are other Republican leaders accepting your plan?
We're going to find out. Eric Cantor endorsed or said positive things about our plan last week when we introduced it. He also said in the debate over the CR, when the continuing resolution's on the floor, he welcomes amendments being brought to the floor to further reduce spending. I guarantee you, we will offer an amendment to get to $100 billion in spending cuts. That's one thing we think is important as we move through the CR. So I like what Eric said last week. I think he said the right things. And this commitment our leadership has given us to an open rule where we can bring our amendments and have up or down votes on the floor, that's a huge step in the right direction so the American people can see us debate spending cuts and debate this whole issue.
All right. Well, Lindsay, meanwhile, Democrats like Dan Gerstein and Anthony Weiner are chortling. They're having a wonderful time seeing this lack of unity among Republicans. Anthony Weiner is quoted as saying Republicans like to point to Paul Ryan as their thought leader, but they appear to be deeply ambivalent about his thoughts.
Well, wait a minute. When we look at, Congressman Ryan's proposal, this is essentially the utopia for Republican government fiscal responsibility.
Well, hold on a second. He also had the support of a Democrat, Alice Rivlin.
He did. This is putting government in check and tackling the big three, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social
showing
Security.
backbone.
Right. It's also setting the tone of the direction that we need to go. Now, realistically, deep structural changes in fiscal debt is not going to change overnight, and it's not going to change with one budget. So what we're seeing...
But it's never going to change unless you develop some kind of backbone and are willing to take on these tough issues.
And that's why we're seeing these addendum proposals like the one from Congressman Jordan saying, look, we need to take a step in the right direction. This is what we need to tackle first.
Jim, will this be settled before the Republicans, before the House comes out with their own budget, which I guess is about a month after the president does?
The CR, the president's got in about 3 weeks, the president will give us his budget, and then you'll begin to see Republicans develop alternatives. But the CR, you're going to see a vote in the House, I think, the second week of February on the continuing resolution, where we'll at least start with this $100 billion number that we think we need to get to for the remainder of this fiscal year.
All right, that's the last word. Jim Jordan, we'll hear more from the panel coming up, and we will